And we are live, I think. It looks like there are a couple of people here. If you can hear me, please put something into the chat box. I would appreciate it. This is another unscheduled live stream, and I'm basically just I got home, checked my mail, and fished out a couple of budget one-piece scope mounts out of the mail and looked at them quickly. Yeah, knowing how my schedule has been going lately, I figured that I should at least do, I guess, a first look type thing quickly, sooner than later, because on Monday I get on the plane again, and at least I want to get some basic information out. Okay. Anyhow, if you are watching this live, please put something in the chat box. Tell me, and that you can hear me. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to go and erase a bunch of silent movies after we're done. Okay. You know what? I can see if the sound is coming through all on my lonesome. It's going to be a little bit of echo for a moment. You guys are going to have to forgive me. I don't have my headphones with me, only a microphone. Let's see if this is live. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that we are alive. Why is my computer working so slowly? Okay. Okay, are we live? And we are live. Perfect. Okay. I have managed to convince myself that there is sound. All right. Gabriel is here. Mr. William Brown, Wolford, Northman. Wonderful. All right. Not sure you guys are here. I'm not going to be here very long. If there are questions, I'll be happy to take them. And the reason I'm doing this, so a little bit earlier on locals on my website, I asked for recommendations for a couple of inexpensive one-piece mounts to look at because I have a couple of new scopes to test. So one of the scopes is the new primary arms second focal plane PLXC, nice little scope. And the mount that just came in that I put it on, and this was actually Wolford's recommendation. This is the Sig Alpha2, nicely inexpensive by modern standards. One-piece mount, I think it's around $80, $85, something like that. It's less than $100. And I am very interested in evaluating quote unquote budget, or at least not ridiculously expensive mounts. Now, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of 400 mounts that, in my opinion, are not very $400 mounts, and in my opinion, are not very good. But for me, it's more important to be able to find a $100 mount that's good than finding a $400 mount that's not good, right? By and large, I look for things that I can recommend. Now, if I can isolate a $150 mount that I can comfortably recommend, that's kind of good. All right, Gabriel is asking, when did you become Dr. Victor Fries? Who is Dr. Victor Fries? I think you're going to have to offer some more specifics. But anyhow, and another mount that got here is the Daniel Defense one-piece mount, and I put the Leupold Mark 4 HD 2.5 to 10 by 42 in it. And this is the Daniel Defense mount. Okay. I don't know how well you will be able to see it on camera, so what I did is I took a couple of pictures, and they are uploaded into my Google Photos album, so I can share them on my screen and perhaps give you a close-up of a couple of things that I liked and a couple of things that I didn't. So which mount would you like me to start with? Okay, Mr. Freeze. Yeah, all right. You have to be more specific. Who's Mr. Freeze? Is that some comic book thing that I am not familiar with? Everybody somehow thinks that I have some sort of familiarity with American pop culture, and that's really hit and miss, I'll be honest with you. I vaguely remember Mr. Freeze from a very bad Batman movie. Is that it? I'm going to go ahead and assume that's what it is. Okay. I'm trying to share a picture. And is it working? Yes, I am able to share. Let's see if this is just going to do it. Yes, perfect. Okay. Okay, villain from Batman. There you go. See, I guessed correctly. I know something about American popular culture. Not a whole lot, but something. Better than nothing. Schwarzenegger played him in the 90s. Yes, I remember. That was one of the worst Batman movies I've ever seen. I have to admit, having seen a good number of Batman movies, unless Christian Bale is playing Batman, it's not worth it. So, okay. Now that we got the whole Batman thing out of the way, so here's the top view of these two scopes I just showed you. Leopold on the left is in the Daniel defense mount, and the primary arms on the right is in the Sig mount. Let's scroll to a picture that has both mounts without the optics. This should be it. Did it update? Yes, update. Okay. Both of these are cantilevered mounts. Okay. Both are cantilevered mounts. They're cantilevered a little bit differently. So depending on how you set up your gun and what kind of setup you need, the Daniel defense will give you a little bit more forward cantilever because both the rear ring and front ring are moved forward a little bit compared to the base. With the Sig mount, the ring spacing is slightly wider, the ring themselves are slightly narrow, so it will probably work with a larger variety of scopes. For example, on the Mark IV, the Daniel defense mount worked okay, but if the saddle box is significantly larger, and on Leopold's saddle box is fairly big. If the saddle box is significantly larger, the Daniel defense mount might not fit. I think this is, being Daniel defense very much an AR-15 mount, but frankly, both of them are. Looking at from the top, there is nothing particularly interesting other than the Daniel defense mount. The rings and everything look a little bit beefier, and in terms of machining and all that, it's clearly, they clearly put more effort into smoother machining, some extra features, try to make it look good. And it is more expensive. It's still by modern standards of how much single piece mounts cost. It's not very expensive. It's about $150, I think, or $155, something like that. So far cry from a $400 single piece mount. And I'll be honest with you, if I were to find a truly $150 mount where I have nothing to pick apart, I think that would be a very, very fair price. And in the 200-ish range, there are good mounts. Not super fancy in terms of accessories, but good, solid one-piece mounts. The Daniel defense one is not going to be it, and I will explain why either. I guess since you guys are not voting, I'm going to start with Daniel defense, and then I'm going to talk about the Sig mount immediately after that. Let's go to, there we go. So the first thing to look at, and what I'm going to try to take you through, my thought process in terms of how I look at these things. And this is a look at the ring halves. Daniel defense is on the right, and Leopold is on the left. You see anything particularly different, particularly interesting? So anything stands out to you when you look at these two side by side? Okay, and my computer just did something weird. Okay. So with these two, Rick is asking whether then you read out mounting options with these are 12 or offset like Badger J arm. Not that I'm aware of. I don't think they're set up for it, and most of the less expensive mounts really aren't. So with these, in principle, I think if you replace the top ring half, you can. I vaguely remember Wolford, who's on here. He's the guy who suggested I look at the Sig mount. I vaguely remember him saying there is some add-on piece you can get for the Sig Alpha2 that helps you set up a red dot. Offhand, I'm not aware of anything for the Daniel defense. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means I don't know of one. Mr. Bork Woof. Okay. How's it going? It's going well. I'm running on 2 hours of sleep, so my sense of humor is going to go into overdrive any moment now. I got off the plane midday today. Woke up at 4 a.m. Eastern time. Let's see. Oh, there you go. Wilfred says Sig has 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock options, but has pretty thin rings, which I'm skeptical of, but pretty cheap. And that gets us exactly to the reason I'm showing you this picture. As far as the ring halves go, the Daniel defense on the right is appropriately stiff for the most part. There's one thing that makes me a little bit suspicious, but it shouldn't be too bad. For the Sig, the top ring is too thin. They thinned it out too much, presumably in an attempt to make it look prettier and slicker. If you look at it carefully, you'll also see in terms of machining and edge, smoothing out, etc. Daniel defense is a better finished mount. But in terms of how it fits, etc., Sig is pretty good, but the top ring is thin. One of the things that you want in a scope mount, you want the ring halves to be fairly stiff. It's very hard to determine stiffness by just looking at things. So one of the simplest ways, if you have a proper torque range, when you start tightening the rings, the amount of rotation you should need to go from loose, basically just get it with tighten it with your finger so you encounter resistance. The amount of rotation you should have from when you adjust encountering resistance to fully torqued down should be minimal, quarter turn. Half turns, okay, quarter turns better. As little as possible. Because what that tells you is that the ring halves are not deflecting, they're not bending, they're not doing anything weird. When you have a scope and as you set it up in a mount, you find that it's rotating, like you line it up and then when you tighten it, you find yourself rotating. That usually happens with mounts where the ring halves are not stiff enough. And as I was setting them up in these mounts, I may need to realign them. I haven't tried them on the gun yet. I just popped the scope in and started messing with it. As I was setting them up and tightening them, I use a fix-a-stick torque wrench, and I'm quite careful with it, and I have a lot of mileage with it. The rings on the Sig are not stiff enough. What that means in practical terms is that I would probably not want to put it on a scope where I plan to twist the turrets quite a lot. And there will be some scopes where it's just not going to play well, because what happens if the ring halves are not stiff enough, they start bending. That means that the way these rings apply pressure to the scope tube is going to be not symmetrical. The catch is that you don't know if it's going to cause you any problems or not. But with mounts, when everything is reasonably in spec, most modern mounts will work just fine. What we're looking for is to minimize the probability of something not working properly, right? So I'm gonna keep the scopes in these mounts, although I'm not entirely happy with them, and I'm gonna explain why. And they will probably work okay on in-spec rails and everything, and they should be fine. But are these going to become my recommendations? Probably not, because there are certain things I look for, and I'm just gonna walk you through it step by step to explain what's what. Mr. Borkoof, I do see your question. Let me talk about the mounts a little bit, and then I'll address that. Okay. But anyhow, with the Daniel defense mount on the right, notice they decided to do this skeletonization right at the bottom of the ring. It is probably okay, but I have seen occasional issues when you thin out that spot a little bit too much. Here doesn't seem like it, and I don't have the means to do proper analysis. When I was getting the rings tightened, it was fine. But and for one-piece mounts, it's less of a problem. But when you see split rings and somebody decided to make it pretty, whatever, to carve out too much metal right underneath the bottom of the ring, that's usually not a good idea, especially under heavy recoil. Okay. All right, moving on to the next picture, unless you guys have questions. Okay, this is Sig again. So nothing horrible here. I like the way Sig did the clamp. I'm going to show you a picture how it fits. It's a proper Stanag clamp. The clamp is actually done well. But there is an interesting thing here, and I'm going to go to the page with the picture. You should be able to see my mouse. Can you guys see my mouse, where my mouse is pointing at? It's pointing at this little sharp corner crease on top of the clamp. Let's see. Can you see the mouse or not? Yes, no, maybe. Either way, I'm hoping you can see the mouse. Right now, the mouse is pointing at this little sharp corner right above where the Picatinny clamp is. In the case of this mount, let me see if I have a better picture here. There you go. This is another picture here. You can see it on the right. It's opposite the clamp. It looks it's more present. See, there is a very sharp corner machined over there. Generally, that's not a good idea. In this case, there is overall enough metal there. It shouldn't be a problem. But when you machine sharp corners like this is where stress fractures in metals, especially aluminum. Well, not especially aluminum, in other metals as well. But this is where stress fractures usually start. It is, you notice on the other side here, it's a kind of a rounded corner, but on the right, opposite the lug nuts, it's a sharp corner. I hope this is making sense. Sharp corner is not a great idea. Does it mean there will necessarily be a problem? No, not necessarily. But if you start getting cracks on this mount, that's going to be the spot where you start having it. Okay. Right? Does this make sense? Yeah. So it turns out if I stay on the page with the photos and move my mouse there, then you see it. Okay. Yeah, that's okay. So you see it when I move it. So perfect. So I'm gonna move it a little bit and show you. So this right here is the sharp corner I'm looking at. For a part like the scope mount, is it likely to be an issue? Probably not. But purely from engineering standpoint, I mean, this kind of shows that whoever came up with this wasn't, and he wasn't thinking very much, which to me is somewhat objectionable. Again, it's an $80 mount. I'm not going to cry too much about it, but I will at least point it out. The rest of the clamp on the Sig is actually done pretty nicely. It's a simple clamp. There are the normal half-inch nuts. It's a Stanag clamp. What that means is that the clamp holds the Picatinny rail on bottom here on two sides, and then the whole flat top here is in contact with the rail. For Picatinny standards, so there are two standards. One is 1913, which was actually developed in the Picatinny arsenal. It's a military army base in New Jersey. And another one is the Stanag standard, which is what excuse me, what is approved by NATO. They look the same, but the spec is written differently. I've talked about in the past. I did a whole live stream on it, so I'm not going to rehash it. Stanag is a far better way to go, and Sig did the clamp. It's a simple Stanag style clamp. I expect it to work great, and based on my admittedly little experience with it so far, just looking at it carefully, there's nothing really wrong with the design. One of the things you want, if you look at where my mouse is right now on this slanted, so there are two of these slanted diagonal little edges on the Picatinny rail. If you have a Stanag style clamp over here, there should be a gap. There's a gap here, and there's a gap here. You should not have any contact here. Contact should be on the top, large, nice, flat surface, and on the bottom here, and the same like on this bottom edge, on the right side of the clamp. That's where you should be having a contact with a well-designed mount. Okay. You with me so far? Okay. I will go with it. All right. going back to the picture. So with Sig, basically, I like the clamp. I am not hugely impressed with the rings. Everything that is machined seems to be machined straight. I didn't see any particular irregularities, nothing like that. But it is, it's clearly an inexpensive mount. I didn't spend a ton of time on the edges, on making smooth surfaces, etc. They were trying to machine it in as cheap of a way as possible while still having it kind of work. I put the low power variable in it, and I have a lot of mileage with primary arms PLXC scopes, so they are not super sensitive to mounts. It should work perfectly fine for me in this application. But if the top ring half was a little bit thicker, I probably would be able to recommend it as an inexpensive mount. As is, it's close, but not quite. Okay, but the clamp is done nicely. Two separate clamps, no stock between them. Stanex style clamps. I think this is done nicely. On the, there you go. So on the Daniel Defense mount, I've seen this style of clamps a couple times, and I could never figure out why somebody would do it this way, because in every way I can think of, this is just a bad idea. If you look at it carefully, see there is this slit here in the bottom of the mount. The way this thing is done, there are two fairly beefy cross screws. All the screws on the Daniel Defense mount at T25, right? As you start tightening the screws, the two halves of the mount come in from the sides, and this gap here gets a little bit smaller. So it is designed to bend, and this kind of a bending is always unpredictable and always produces undesirable effects because it doesn't reference on anything. If you have a mount like this, it's on a slightly undersized Picatinny rail. If you look at it carefully, you will notice that as you're tightening these cross screws, the mount starts tilting to the side. Invariably, quite a few. I've seen it on Scalar Works. I'm sure I'll see it on this one and quite a few others. So if you're looking for a mount that can be removed and then reattached with some measure of repeatability, this is not going to be it. This thing is basically squeezing the rail on two sides, and I have here's another picture where you look at it. So the way it is, so it's squeezing the rail on two sides. Ostensibly, this surface a little bit here, supposed to make contact, but because the base of the mount is actually bending slightly as you tighten it, the angle at which these surfaces sit changes. So even there, you don't have quite enough contact. So you're basically just squeezing the PIC rail from two sides. And on the Picatinny rail, you are pushing on it in the place where it has the least amount of metal. Eventually, it'll chew up the rail. On something that doesn't kick a whole lot, once zeroed, it's probably going to stay zeroed. I'm going to test it. But it's just a terrible clamp design. Here, what it looks like when it's sitting on a rail. See on the top here, where in a Stanag clamp, you would have good contact, and that's really what references the position of the mount. Here you don't have any of that, so you have kind of contact here and here, but as you tighten it, the amount of contact you have on these slanted edges is just going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Just not a good clamp design at all. I'm surprised that the company like Daniel Defense would do something like this. Okay. Once again, guys, I see your questions. Let me just finish with a commentary and I'll go through them, okay? So what we have with these mounts is kind of interesting in that on the Daniel Defense, the ring part is done fairly nicely. And overall machining is done. You see all the surfaces are kind of smooth and rounded. I don't see any sharp corners. There's nothing that should be obviously inducing cracks and all that. But clamp design is basically just garbage. Okay. On the Sig, this is a Sig clamp. The clamp is done well. As we go up from there, also on the bottom of the rings, because it's a cheap mount, they did not try to do any unnecessary skeletonization, so they didn't screw anything up. The bottom half of the rings are done well. On Daniel Defense, they're carving stuff out for shits and giggles. Doesn't save that much weight. And once again, carving stuff out here, so close to the bottom of the ring, is usually risky. And the catch is, again, right, we're playing probabilities here. We want to minimize the chance of a screw-up, and by carving out metal in this place, you may or may not have a problem. Why experiment? I don't know. As far as the recoil mitigation goes, for both mounts, it's the cross screws. There are no separate recoil lugs. I think that's a little bit short-sighted. It works, should be okay. But for Daniel Defense, the way they did the clamp, it would be difficult to have a standalone recoil lug. For Sig, they could have easily added one that would cost them $1 more. But, you know, once again, for what the Sig Alpha2 costs, I can't complain too much. I can complain about the thickness of the top ring half. Again, it is too thin and for no good reason. So the Sig is not a pretty mount. It will work more or less okay. And if I could get, you know, the rings, the top half of the Daniel Defense mount, and the clamp from the Sig mount, that would be a great and expensive mount. But you can't have everything that you want. Okay. In terms of aligning, let's see. Let's get me back in the picture. There you go. In terms of using various tools, wedges or shims or whatever to level out the scope, Sig, once again, provides a nice flat surface. You should be able to use that as a reference surface to level the scope fairly easily. With Daniel Defense, there is some machining there, but looking at it carefully, like on it's a slightly scalloped, but there are two ridges there with flats on top. You should be able to use probably shims or something like that as well. I haven't tried it yet. Once these go on a gun, I will. Now, they're not going to go on a gun for a couple more weeks because at 6 in the morning on Monday, I get back on the plane. So that's just that. Which is why I'm doing this now, impromptu, to at least get some information out there. Okay, let's see. Looking at the questions we have for now. If there's anything else you guys have put in the chat, put it in the chat box. Mr. Borkwolf, have you had a chance to check out the new Vortex AMG 1 to 10? Yes, I have been looking at it for a couple of years now. I don't have one here. I have seen it multiple times, got a chance to spend a good amount of time with them. That's a very, very impressive scope. One thing to keep in mind is that in terms of pure optical performance, it's a very, very nice scope, but it's not going to be significantly better than it's not better than the Schmidt and Benders and all that. In terms of overall optical performance, it's probably pretty close to the regular Razor Gen 3 1 to 10. But it's like 2 inches shorter, right? And 2 inches shorter is a huge deal. It is hard to overstate how hard it is to make a scope that short perform that well. So if the scope overall length doesn't matter to you, okay, that's probably not the scope for you. If you start putting a bunch of other stuff on it and you already have a short handle, etc., short overall length makes a huge difference. And there, you get the AMG 1 to 10, and you don't get any real performance compromises compared to quite a few high-end, longer scopes. That's the big thing, right? So people keep on thinking that it's going to completely knock the socks off of the S&B in terms of optical performance. No, it's not. It basically gives you the performance of a Razor Gen 3 1 to 10, or thereabouts, maybe a little better in some ways, worse than others. Pretty close, I think. In a much smaller package. And that is huge. Like I said, it's hard to overstate how difficult that is. Okay. I've had people go, oh, I've seen it. I wasn't that impressed for the money. That's because they don't understand how hard it is to make optical systems like this short. Once again, I know I'm beating a dead horse. It's unbelievably difficult. And that thing was in development for a very long time. Now, am I going to do a full review workup on it? Probably not until it hits the civilian market at any sort of significant numbers. Once again, I generally try to only review optics that are available to civilians because I like to be able to make a recommendation one way or the other. A small number of AMG 123s did go out to civilians as a part of that package that Optics was selling, but that's not enough. If they become normally available for sale, I'll get my hands on one and do a proper full review and work up and compare it to other scopes and all that. As is, I haven't done a ton of comparison. I did spend enough time with it to form an opinion, and I gotta say, like, given how tiny the bloody thing is, it's unbelievably impressive. So also one of the reasons I like the March shorty scopes so much. There are compromises and all that. That thing is so tiny and it performs so well given how short it is. It's just, for an optics guy, just seeing that work as well as it does is incredibly impressive. Yeah. Mr. Misty Cool goes, I'm leaning toward the MDT Uni mount. So I've seen it, I haven't tested it. Just looking at it, it seems like a nice mount. I don't like the fact that there is one single long clamp. You have to be very careful how you torque that down. When people rush to mount their scopes, I see a lot of issues with that. But if you like it, you like it. I think it's grossly overpriced. So if I was buying a fancy mount at this stage, it would be Area 419. I'll be honest with you. Not that there's anything really wrong with MDT other than the clamp design. What happens is that if you have one long clamp with multiple screws, and if it's a standard clamp design where the clamp just slides in, what happens is that if you don't torque it down the right sequence, just the right way, you're going to have lateral zero shift. I've seen this more than once with mounts like the Arc Embrace, which that's one of the few potential issues with Embrace and all that. The good part is that if you're careful with how you torque it down, it's not an issue. But I have seen more than one person screw this up, as simple as that sounds. Doesn't mean that you will. So if you get one, it should probably work just fine for you. But I've had a couple of people ask me to look at it, and I went and looked at it. And given how expensive it is, I wasn't hugely enthusiastic about spending a ton of time on it because it's. I'm sure it's MDT machine stuff very well. I'm sure it's an incredibly well machined, but a perfectly conventional mount. So. Do you use Lube when installing rings and mount? Okay, so it depends on where. I often do on the bottom of the mount rings. So if you have a static style clamp, it's not a bad idea to lubricate a few surfaces. I don't usually use Loctite, but what you want, a good way of saying this is that when the Picatinny, when the clamp settles on a rail at the right torque settings and all that, the final position of the pieces needs to be dictated by geometry of the mount, not by the friction between surfaces. Depending on the surface finish and all that and what kind of torque you need to get it to, as you tighten these things, sometimes don't quite get where they need to go. So, I remember the old steel Badger rings. A friend of mine pointed it out to me not too long ago. Always used to come, with quite a lot of oil or grease of sorts, on on the clamps and all that. And we always thought, that's just how they machine them and all that. Now I wonder if they knew something that we forgot. But I'm finding that to be fairly useful. That assumes that nothing in the mount depends on friction. There is a normal recoil log and all that sort of stuff. Mr. Rick Apri. What was Daniel Defense thinking with that? I don't know, but I have seen this type of a clamp design here and there over the years. And I will say this, right? So if you have a reasonably in spec rail, once you get this thing properly tightened and seated, as after a few recoil cycles, oftentimes something shifts, you might chase your zero a little bit. Once it's properly settled, and if you never move that mount and it's not a very heavy kicker, it works okay. But given that we have perfectly reasonable mount designs, I think the way they did it probably simplifies machining a little bit. But beyond that, it's just lazy engineering. I don't know. So, Mr. Kyle, when will the Dark Lord talk glass? Glass specs are super nerdy. Since competitions have put budgets out there, the optics market has gotten incredible, just flooded with new stuff. So I don't do glass specs very much because it's not necessarily translatable into performance. And a lot of modern performance really comes down to system design rather than just the glass specs. All on the high end, everybody uses very high quality raw glass. It's the design and the assembly and the alignment and baffling that's what makes a difference. So that's one of the reasons I don't get into. That's why I don't get into the glass specs all that much. Mr. Borkwood, why is it so hard to make a short and compact LPVO, and how did Vortex accomplish that? So with optical systems, as they get shorter, you have to bend light more, right? So think of it this way. Do I have a good demo? I have a piece of chalk and I have a blackboard behind me. Let's do this. So let's say you have a lens, normal lens, and it has fairly long focal length. Let's say light's coming in from the right. In proper optical design, it always goes from left to right, but I'm right-handed, and this easy. And if you have a fairly long focal length design, light forms an image somewhere here. And I'm making this as a single lens element, but you can have multiple lens elements and all that. There's a certain angle, light's coming in like this, and the worst case bend is going to be like this. There's some angle here, etc. If you're not bending light, meaning you're bending light rays, reorienting them too much, this is comparatively simple to manage. You will have some aberrations. You add additional lens pieces to correct it. If you got lens of the same diameter, and now you need to focus it down here, say light coming in from here. This is a simplistic explanation, but this is probably a good visual. Very different angle. Routing light this way is much harder, and you pick up a huge number of aberrations. It's hard to keep the resolution high. The quality of the lens elements have to go up. You need to have lots of additional lens elements to correct for that. You may have to go to some very exotic shapes to cut down on aberrations. The way optics work, right? The first element starts massaging light rays and starts adding aberrations of all sorts. And you add the next one to correct those aberrations, introduce a new one. You get another glass element in there. And these can be different type of a glass, low dispersion, standard, etc. To correct more aberrations, etc., 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 etc. The shorter you try to make all of this for a given lens diameter, the harder all of this becomes. I hope this makes some sort of sense. As far as how to accomplish this, technology moves forward. March did it, Vortex did it. Other people sometimes are capable of it. But what happened is that there wasn't as much drive for it over the years, but now with the various clip-ons and all the additional things we put on rifles, especially for the military, real estate is at a premium. So having a short rifle scope becomes extremely advantageous. And what Vortex and March, theirs is also very short, pulled off is really quite impressive. Okay. Kyle, amount of lens for one. I don't know what that means. Wolford, to be expected. The thing with the Sig for me is you can get the mount and the integrated top ring RDS mount for 140, 106 total, which is why I've told people pairing a typical PSLX Strike Eagle with an MRDS, a reasonable combo that's price point. Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is a reasonable combo. I hope they will beef up the ring slightly at some point. But like I said, given the price, I'm not complaining too much. The Circle MDT has a torque sequence, good for them. They should. Lube on clamped to rail surfaces, yes. So it's not a bad idea to put some grease on there. Favorite mount, Rick Apria. Favorite mount for 1 to 10 LPVO on AR-15 for DMR type matches. Can't decide on height. Either 1.5 or 1.7, even 1.93. Well, it depends on how much you're trying to spend. So as I said, I've been looking at mounts lately. The ones where, on almost everything, I have something to complain about. On the mounts, on the Area 419, I literally found nothing to complain about. And on the Reptilia AUS, I really found nothing to complain about. If you're willing to spend the money, this is where I'd be looking at. There are other good ones out there, right? I'm not saying these are only good ones, but of the ones I have now spent a lot of time with on the higher end of things, this is where I would start the search. Okay. Mr. The X, in my humble opinion, I like rugged, simple mounts. I generally agree with you, right? So, but people like to skeletonize things to make them look like they're lighter. You're not saving that much metal. But there is a right and a wrong way to skeletonize stuff. If you want to see how to do a lightweight mount the right way, Reptilia AUS, OS, whichever way they pronounce it, is a very nicely done lightweight mount. So, Mr. The X, so why not go to 1.25 or 1.5 on the low end instead of having to make the impossible bend to 1x? So 1x is not necessarily what's making it impossible. The whole thing makes it hard. If you're trying to go fast, 1x is distinctly faster than 1.25 or 1.5. For tactical application, there is a good reason for 1x. The converse of that is if your application does not require 1x, you may find something better with a scope that doesn't go all the way down to 1. Okay, Mr. Recap here, adding detail, generous target size, yada yada, 7800, lots of positional of barricades. Yeah, like I said, I would look at Reptilia AUS. It's a nice mount. Badger Condition 1 is a good mount. I haven't spent much time with it. I need to. Again, all of those, by the time you accessorize them, the price really adds up. Okay. Mr. Borkwolf, is there anything out there that matches or even beats the Schmidt & Bender 1-8 in raw performance? Of the tactical-oriented low power variables, probably not. Of the hunting-oriented one, Blazer 1-7x28 is pretty remarkable. But another, it's a fairly long scope, it's pretty heavy and all that, but brilliant design. Okay. Low power variables, light performance sucks compared to a lot of scopes, within reason. So there's nothing about low power variables that makes them inherently better than low light, other than you have a kind of small objective diameter. So low light is basically given comparable, image quality, system design characteristics. Objective diameter is what governs low light performance. Okay, and we got to the end of the comments. All right, gentlemen. So let's give it a couple more minutes, and then I'm gonna wrap up and go take a nap because I'm kind of collapsing here. I wanted to get the basic information on the mounts I'm looking at out. I hope you found it useful. And the important thing here, again, I do not have the capability to look at every mount known to man out there. But the thought process, how I think about them, how I go through things, that's something I'm trying to get out there so you can look at them in a similarly coherent way. Wolford, simply out of curiosity, who do you think did it better, March or Vortex AMG? Oh, it's not a simple answer because they were going for something a little bit different. So March was going for more of a general purpose scope design. That's why it's dual focal plane with a heavy fiber dot in the back. That's why it has side focus. It's a little bit more of a general purpose thing. The AMG, it's a tactical scope. It was built for some military tenders and stuff like that. So they overlap, but they kind of aim at a somewhat different market. On balance, I'd say that AMG is a little bit better on 1x, and I think March 1 to 10 is a little bit better as you go up in magnification. Side focus really helps and all that. Kind of, pick your poison. Okay. Kyle is talking about ammo and all that. All right. Okay, guys. Once again, this was not planned. Thank you all for chiming in. My intention was to keep this one short, say what I want to say, answer a couple of questions, and move on. Yeah, unless you have something like right now, I'm gonna wrap this up. And if I have time, I'll try to do another short one next week. I will be in Washington, D.C. Again, do the usual things, sit in the hotel, and do one of these partly because I'm bored and I like interacting with people. Going once. Going twice. Sold. Let's wrap this up. If there is something you are not thinking of that comes to you later, put it in the comments under the video on whichever platform you're on, and I will do my best to address it as soon as I can. Thank you all, and you guys have a good weekend.